Joining us live now from Jerusalem is David Enoch, law and philosophy professor at Hebrew University and Oxford University, as well as a member of Israeli Law Professors Forum for Democracy. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Thanks for having me.
So yes, why now is the question. I mean, this is what was dominating the protests, the Israeli public before October 7th. Obviously, October 7th changed everything. But why now?
That's a good question. I should say that the proposal that passed as a bill earlier today is somewhat different from the ones that were on the table pre-October 7th, but it suffers from the same flaws. I think it's very clear that Netanyahu is working for a whole other set of considerations. One set of consideration is to take attention away from the situation with the hostages, to an extent, with the war. I mean, you started the hour with a report about missiles still flying in a year and a half after the beginning of a war. So it's good for Prime Minister Netanyahu to just divert attention, something that he is very, very good at. That's clearly one of the issues here. Perhaps another is that they understand in the coalition that they do not have the support of the majority and are unlikely to have it in the next election. And that can sort of count in both ways. If you are in good faith, it means that you try not to do to go about implementing any, revolutionary constitutional steps. But if you are not in good faith, what you try to do is to seize as much power as you can. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Well, and it seems like, we're seeing it, all over the world, not just here. We're seeing it also in the United States. I mean, what does it say about democracy as we know it?
That is correct. We will have to reconceive democracy, I suspect, at least in some ways. But actually, the comparison to the U.S. is interesting because some people say, the current reform or judicial overhaul in Israel is all about making sure that appointing judges becomes a more explicitly political process. And when people say that, and when they are for that, they will often cite as an example the United States and the way that at least some judges, perhaps Supreme Court justices, are appointed there. But then we have to remember at least two things. One is that I'm not sure that when I'm looking now at the American judicial system, what I see is something that we should all be envious of. And second, and just as importantly, constitutional systems are evaluated holistically. So it depends on how all of the different parts of the system sit together. And in the US, despite its many shortcomings, of which we find out more and more as time goes by, there are still some checks and balances that in Israel are just completely lacking. We do not have an entrenched written constitution. We don't have two houses of parliament and so on. As a result, almost all of the checks and balances that we do have rely on the judiciary. So allowing the Knesset, the parliament, and also the government, and perhaps to an extent, the prime minister, control over the judiciary is just disastrous.
And, with that said, what the opposition, of course, saying it's the death to democracy as we know it, but what would the appeal process look like if you're also dealing with judges that are part of this?
Sure. So first of all, I don't think that this is the death of democracy because democracies die slowly and gradually. We've been seeing a huge decline in every parameter of democracy over a long period of time. And there is yet more, we can deteriorate much further, and I suspect that we will. So there's nothing dichotomous going on. There is not one moment that changes everything. But this is an important moment. There's no direct appeal. Of course, people can petition the Supreme Court to argue that this amendment is an unconstitutional amendment. I believe that some petitions have already been submitted, and I'm sure that others will too. I don't know. I can't really say how likely they are to be accepted by the court. But we should view the current local struggle over this specific constitutional amendment. We should view it in the context of a much wider struggle, which of course still goes on.
Right. All right. Thank you, David Enoch, as always, for your very clear way of explaining something that is really quite complicated.
Thank you.